Good afternoon. Welcome to November's History for Lunch today. We just ask that you please mute your phones, cell phones, if you have one on, or either turn it off. But we would like to send out a reminder that our next History for Lunch will be November the 20th at 12 p.m. We'll have Dr. Marty Richardson, member and vice chief of the Halawa-Saponi Indian tribe, and he will provide an informative talk on the history, culture, language, education, and contemporary issues of American Indian tribes in North Carolina. So we do invite you to join us on November the 20th at 12 p.m. Today, we would like to welcome Ms. Sharon Meade, site manager-curator of Outer Banks Center for Wildlife Education, Currituck County, and she will discuss how a duck hunting trip changed the course of education in Currituck County.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me know if I move around a lot sometimes. I step away, and if you can't hear me, just tell me get back over there. So, if you have, some people have never heard of Joseph Palmer Knapp. Some of us probably know more than even I do about Joseph Palmer Knapp. But today I'm going to try to cover in 30 to 45 minutes a man's life. Anybody's life takes a long time if you start and tell their history. But this was an extraordinary man, and the differences he made in Currituck County and here just on the eastern seaboard. So, as my nana would say, he was a fine figure of a man. Let's take a look here. Born in Brooklyn, New York, to his parents, of course, Phoebe Palmer Knapp and Joseph Fairchild Knapp. He was born into wealth. He was born in, let me get that exact date there for you real quick. 1847 and starting the family. So when he was coming up, they had wealth, but he would make more. His mother was a very prolific hymn writer, along with Mrs. Crosby, Blessed Assurance, over 500 hymns. She was also an organist. They were staunch Methodists, and that's going to come into play as well. There is the townhouse that they owned in Brooklyn. Mind you, it did take up the whole block. Again, by this time, he went to Brooklyn Polytechnical Institute and to Columbia, and was kind of destined to come in and take Dad's business. So when his father died and she decided, the family, to sell the home, she had her music room, which that's her pipe organ, moved to the Savoy Hotel, where she occupied a wing until her death. Kind of like all the rest of us are planning our return. But you can see over there to the left side of that picture, that's her pipe organ. So Joseph is in New York. He worked at his father's businesses. So we have two of those. He was Knapp and Company, and then, of course, the publishing firms. But most importantly, his father was a vice president of Metropolitan Life. Now, when Joseph Palmer took it over, he came up with this idea called mutual shares and sold it back to his employees, and kind of moved out of the Metropolitan Life segment of his life, and then, of course, moved it more into publishing. So you take a look here. It's like I say, reading off all these facts. It gives you a breakdown of what was happening. Most importantly, when we get down here to where his publishing life starts, at the time, to print color, you had to do large prints and rolls at a time. You could only do one color. So if you wanted to, but it was very expensive, you rolled one color, then you had to change everything again, roll in another color. Knapp comes up with a process called autograve, which meant you could print 4 colors at one time. And we all take this for granted nowadays. Gosh, we got digital, we've got everything. But then that meant you could print color fast and efficiently. And of course, as far in the publishing world, this was huge. We didn't have internet. We didn't have the means to instantly get information. So your magazines and your newspapers were just vital. So at this point in time, he's got his autograve process going. So at one point, there wasn't a publication probably in our nation that was full of color that wasn't run through autograve. So again, think about that. You got your finger on every pie as far as publishing. Of course, like I say, he was also a very well-rounded gentleman. He was a wing shot hunter. He was an excellent golfer and tennis player, and or as people would probably refer at the time, a man's man, and was, of course, very well suited to it. He grew up in it. Now, when we start moving further, because he's moving his way toward us, but he had bought out magazines, the Farm and Fireside and Collins Weekly. But one of the most important things as well, he met Mr. Duke at the turn of the century, and they had this idea for baseball cards. Well, you need some color in those baseball cards. And if you ever see one of those Honus Wagner's cards, you can look at it and you can see that process. You can kind of see some dots in it, and that was part of that process. But again, all right, now, as a very patriotic man, of course, someone had to print those Uncle Sam posters in red, white, and blue. And again, there's Joseph Knapp. So he's built himself, of course, quite an empire. Interestingly enough, when you go and look at things that he ran, you did not see his name on the letterhead. You did not see it in the list of officers of all his businesses. And that's the way he liked it. He was, in many ways, an extremely humble person, not given to bravado and bragging. So when you go back, even through American Lithographic Company, if you look hard enough, you would find his name. But otherwise, no, he kept himself kind of behind the scenes, but he had his finger on everything that happened in his businesses at the time. So we're in New York. There's the first wife he had 2 children with. They divorced. This is the second Mrs. Knapp. She's a very attractive woman, is she not? You kind of like a person who takes a picture with their dog. That's another thing. Mr. Knapp wasn't, like say, he liked his dogs. He was on the first board for Westminster Kennel Club. His family grew up, his children. And when we're done, you take a look, they raised dogs. They competed quite a bit. Interesting enough, Boston Terriers and even Chow Chows, because hunting dogs were our purview down here. So you can see, they ended up divorcing as well. This is a picture of him, of course, at the Metropolitan team. He is right there to your immediate left. He's very distinguishable. So here we go. There. And of course, here's some examples of the autograve process. The colors are rich and saturated. And of course, at the time they came out, they were quite beautiful, and people unexpected to get color in their photographs. And of course, in a magazine, it would have been tremendous. That lady, they like their dogs, and you kind of like a man that likes his dogs. Okay, so he's a man of the world. He's got his fingers in lots of businesses, and he liked to hunt. And of course, he knew a lot of publishers as well. So, and writers. He was quite prolific in that area as well, acquainted with many people. So he comes down to Currituck to go hunting, and here's where it starts. He had a bluebird day, so came down, wasn't a good hunt. And he's back on the boat, heading back to Baltimore, and he runs into Mr. Thomas Dixon, Arthur, Birth of a Nation, the Klansman, which he was acquainted. And of course, he told him, "Oh, no, no, no. This is Mecca for duck hunting." So now we're right here in the late 20s. So they come back to Currituck, and we go to Thomas Dixon's house, and he shoots. And of course, in less than a year, he has bought this property. So if we look a little bit back, this is just a little background on what was over there at the time. Of course, Knott's Island was settled and through grants, and they have a very rich history. Mackey Island was where Thomas Dixon was. Now, that's another whole story. We could talk about that one another day, the Mackey family. So he had the daughters, like you say, got bought and sold many times. This was when they first had started logging out. And for many a year, these houses stood. They are no longer there at this time. So by this time, the house is there, and that's about it. There's Thomas Dixon's house. So as you can see, 2,500 acres, December 31st, 1918 for, gosh, we could all afford that ourselves, but like I say, the 39,000 and change. So he gets there, and again, we'll go through the different hardships, but more importantly, he got there, he started building the house, and he built it in the manner of Mount Vernon, as far as the style, 35 rooms, staff, of course, in the back. We're going to take a look at the house and the interior and the magnificent gardens that were there at the time. But what he did notice one day was he picked up some kids who were walking to school and asked them about their school and how long were they going, and found out that they only went 3 months out of the year. And the whole system was very inadequate. And again, here's part of this story. So at the time, this was over on the Currituck side where the ferry dock is now. There was a lot of controversy that some rich millionaire had come and bought up everything and thought he could rule us and tell us how to do things. But they found out far from that, what a patron he was over the years. So you could come into Snowden Station and take a boat across, or you could come into Munden's Point over on like basically what is now the Virginia Beach side. And that's how you transported your goods and everything you needed to build. So you can imagine building a 35-room house, quite industrious. It took them about 2 years. And there we have it. This is called Oak Point. Oak Point is sadly deteriorated right now in Knott's Island, especially after some storms. But you can see, like I said, he built boathouse. He had orchards. He had a 9-hole golf course at the time. But more importantly, he was worried about people in the county and the children and their education. There's a view of the back of the house. He marries again, married a Southern girl this time from South Carolina, Margaret Rutledge, and they moved to Mackey's Island. Now, by the time he starts to look into things, frankly, he's appalled, because he's a person who everything he ever did, he made sure he knew what he was doing first. And he carries his legacy over when he does this. So he first starts with finding out what they need, and considering in the day what $250,000 would do, he set about building the Knapp School, which we call the Knapp School, but it's the elementary school, and the Joseph P. Knapp School in Currituck, which is now our early college. And because you had to have teachers, he hired, ready, a female school superintendent. which caused quite a stir. Miss Fanny Newber, and she came in and set things to right. So then he goes, they start recruiting for teachers, and excuse me, he recruits. My sister's here today with me, and our Nana, Miss Wilma Etter, he recruited from McMinnville, Tennessee. And she was 20 years old. She took the train and came here to teach school. She used to tell us stories about us. We wished we'd asked more, but nonetheless, she did tell us that when she saw Currituck Sound for the first time, because she was from Tennessee, she thought it was the ocean. And she got the worst sunburn of her life a few days after she got here. But she admired him greatly. And some people used to make the joke, well, he brought in all these teachers and we got some fresh blood. So there was that element as well. He brought in music teachers. He brought in instruments for them. People were extremely, of course, we're moving out of the Depression. People in Knott's Island, if they went into the hospital, they would get ready to get out and find their bill had been paid. He had some girls that he put through nursing school, just under the preface that they could pay him back, and they would go forth and work here and work in the county. Of course, mind you, he never expected them to pay him back. And people that could not pay their taxes in Currituck at the time, he would pay their taxes and tell them, when you get right, just pay me back the tax money. And we're square. Many a family went through that, eye operations, accidents. And on top of that, of course, the people of Knott's Island and the whole county we weren't a rich county. And so the ladies would make jams and jellies and things to bring them in gratitude, which he thought were delightful and wonderful. So being who he is always, why not set the ladies up with like a farmer's exchange? So they did, so that they had income from what they did. Again, he was just a forward thinker. It was, he has a whole plan. And again, this because it's such a big scope, but he had a plan for farmers, because we were so, duck hunting industry, cottage industry started when market hunting was here, and then the sportsmen's clubs, that if farmers could raise ducks on their land, then you could propagate them just like you could a crop, and then let them go. And now you've got birds. Well, they did that in Europe after wars, after World War I, and of course II, because everything got shot to shucks. And so that was a way to do it. So he set about on his own land, canals, impoundments, growing food plots. And he did all this, though, after consulting with people who had knowledge. He would get a botanist and a biologist to come in there and tell him, what can we do here to make this better? Now, they wrote him up in the paper as sometimes like a crazy person, because, again, it was a new idea. That, in turn, when he had all these studies done, brought in 8 ideas, and that later becomes More Game Birds of America, which later becomes, as we all know it, Ducks Unlimited. So let's take a look at some things, and I'll keep telling you some tales about him. This, of course, is the Knapp Lodge. As you can tell, this one was taken in the spring. They found out after the first couple of years, they screened in that front portico because they found out about mosquitoes. Yep. As you can see, it's quite beautiful, well planted. The gardens, when we look at them, you'll notice that they have very mature stock in them. She loved camellias and different types of roses, and there's a lot of boxwood. We're going to see that. And what they did, and we still had people at Knott's Island at the time, would drive her, and they'd drive all around the area. And if a person had a lot of nice boxwoods in their yard, she would pull in and ask them would they sell them to her. And that's how they got mature stock brought in. to the Knapp Lodge. You can see, like I said, got those beautiful mansion roofs on the end. He had an office in here, and you're going to see it's very, very modest. The grounds are just magnificent. Oh, it had a cement pond too. I was going to say, that sadly, as is everything that is a remnant of the Knapp estate, and of course, is no longer there on Mackey. It is now a National Wildlife Refuge. But as you can see in the spring, it was glorious, and the view was glorious as well. If looking from Mackey, you were right there at the mouth of the Intercoastal Waterway, and Tulls Bay was across from you. Each path led out of the north and south wings of the house. At this time, he was probably raising close to 5,000 birds every year. And when we're done and you can come and look, because people thought that he was being foolish, 31 men, not silent, sent him a letter promising them their help to him, and signing their names to it, that they backed him on it. Because like you say, he was bucking against the grain. And of course, he was still considered that millionaire outsider, although he dearly loved Currituck. I can remember the house being there when it was derelict, because it was right across from my Nana's house, and we would look at it all the time and want to ride over there. And sadly, it was pillaged pretty much, but we do know where some pieces are. I know where the box lock is from the front door, and some shutters and things like that. And then we were lucky enough to have the Dudleys, who were confidants and good friends of the Knapps in Moyock. He wrote his papers for him, and we have those. And there are some nice pieces still here. And we recently got an oil painting from the Rom family, who were close with them as well. And that is now over in Mr. Knight's office at Whalehead, and I urge you to go see it. All right. As you can see, they propagated quite a bit. There's Mr. Waterfield. He was one of their gardeners. He also had Mr. Isaac Doxey work there, and they called him the duckologist. He looked after all the propagation. He gave jobs to people in Knott's Island. Over half the island could be employed by him at some or part of the time, whether it be helping somebody else or working in the house. They weren't party people, but he was a very, how will we put, not society so much, although he was on all those social registers. We know Billy Mitchell came to visit him one time, and the only remark Mr. Neff had was he brought 32 pieces of luggage, and we don't dress for dinner anymore. So people came. When we start talking about wildlife and education, he also came up with a plan, because people always thought that market hunting was what decimated ducks completely. And I'm not saying, because we have our whole museum dedicated to this story, market hunting was a slaughterhouse. At the time, they weren't quite aware, what the devastation would be, but they did take steps at a certain point. But what really started all that was the 30s Dust Bowl, because now we'd lost our habitat. And when you lose your breeding habitat, there go your species. So again, he kept thinking, let's think, how can we make this better? So he brought in Aldo Leopold. He brought in Ding Darling. They come up with this idea for a federal duck stamp. People don't know that, but yeah, he was right. They were right over there at this house, and they talked about it. And can we put an excise tax on this? And can we use it for conservation? And the billions of dollars that still come from duck stamps have helped the waterfowl immeasurably. And when you lift one species, you lift another. So again, when you start looking at all the things he did, they branch out and they go into all kinds of different things. Let's look some more, because these are truly beautiful. See if I can see too. This is the walkway coming up to his office. That's all rose bushes and camellias. Sadly, there's only one crepe myrtle left over there that I know of. Storms took out some of the last ones we had. So you can see how very mature and well done this is. This was in front of the house with the sundial. It's just lovely. He had his, like you say, he had his dove coat. It was done as, again, quite a colonial style. You can see these are very formal gardens, but just how lovely. Oh, and there's one of the greenhouses and some of the crepe myrtles. I think there's 2 left. Maybe 2. Hope so, anyway. There's some of her camellias. She had quite a few. And of course, she could afford to, but she also, when they started the Knapp school at Knott's Island, there was no cafeteria. There was, like I say, kids would come with what they could have. So Mrs. Knapp brought in some ladies, and they used their own kitchen and would take and make sure those children were fed, made sure they had shoes, and made sure, like he said, if a future, because that's going to be your future, which forward thinking, we need to reincarnate him, maybe bring him back. But again, just so much. Just if you go down, and there's list after list after list, and I don't want to bore you to death reading things, so we'll just keep taking a look here. Got a very fine boathouse. As a boater myself and traveled to work, sister and I used to we live in Islet and both of us worked in Corolla. I still do. We would boat over because it was just so much faster, not to mention, well, it's good for your mental health too, just out there riding around on the Sound in the morning. He had a very fine boathouse. That was his, just one of his lap street boats that he had brought down from New York. He supported our hunters in that hunt clubs at the time were very jealous of their marshes. They used guards. We even had shootings. But he didn't hold with that at all, that an honest man was making an honest living and you were sporting, and there was a difference. And so he always backed them, even when they had lawsuits, and they did. Over all of this, we have all the I have an awful lot of correspondence, and of course all the hunt clubs had lawyers, but of course he just lived amongst us, and so sided with them. The man was making his living. He wasn't the best at general husbandry, shall we say. They did fireworks once on Christmas, and he said there wasn't a duck for the next 5 years. So they canceled doing that one again. But again, he he tried. Another thing, ooh, that's a nice boathouse. He he decided he might get some cows, and so he brought in 30 cows, and some say 30, probably 10 bulls. Well, they said you could hear the racket from miles away because bulls were fighting, and he found out that no, you can't have more than 1 bull. So he kind of quit his work there as far as having cattle. He raised pheasants as well, and we have some pictures. But after the first time he saw a male pheasant, he found them too beautiful to shoot, and so we have pictures of him at the back door of his study, and there's pheasants, and he's feeding, and they're his pets at this point. He came up with an idea of an undulating dike. We put ours all in straight, and then after you get a storm, boom, there they go again. The remnants of this dike are still there. Of course, we've lost so much on that side of Mackey anyway, but it was interesting. He just thought that would work better. And there's the Dovecote. Oh, these houses were still there because they were the lumber companies, but he could let people stay in them or put them up. At some point in time, they even put a Sears Roebuck Kid house over there. All right. Okay, here we go. He found that he'd keep a little notebook, and let's see, because he found some of our Southern phrases, shall we say, or different. Because he didn't understand at first that a guy who could not imitate a wild bird would tell him, I can't mock him, which, mock bird sound. So he had written that down. And he heard a person say over there one time, pointing to a very large lady, that the comment was, she must need a heap of fodder. Not nice, but again, very truthful. And referring to a lady as the knitness woman on Knott's Island. A lot of ladies, they did their own, and they had to. He didn't understand. He thought a stake in the water, and they finally told him, no, that's a stall. So again, that made his book. When he asked how old someone was, and someone replied, I don't know, but he's got right much age on to him. So, birds alighting, coming in, Dunset, which we know that one if you go out there with boys now, blare instead of a flare of light. If ducks left, they got weaned away from the place they were. Presently instead of soon. Passel, meaning anything, a lot of. A passel of youngins. Black brass, called chub. Again, but he took notice. He paid attention. And so by the time that he got ready and addressed these people when they would take him to court, always civil, didn't swear much except when he needed to. And we're going to take a look at the interior of the house, but this is from Mr. Saunders' paper, as we all know, Independent. And I'll read you this one, and then we'll take a look. Currituck County people who have not met Joseph P. Knapp regard him as just another northern millionaire sportsman who has taken up just so much more of their hunting grounds. Those who have met him regard him as a plain, lovable, generous, hearty, democratic, and neighborly fellow who has not been dehumanized by reason of his great wealth. He on his estate and many of his neighboring people are guests in his home. His neighborliness and generosity have made him fast friends. One of his neighbors, who had to go to the hospital for an expensive operation, left the hospital to find the bill had been paid. The woman whose husband was injured while working on his island received a Christmas present of a check for $500. And they do say he pours the biggest glass of genuinely good liquor one finds in Currituck County, known for a generous port. Of course, at that time, most people were only getting bootleg whiskey. So, like you say, generous in all ways, civic-minded. In 1933, he sent a long plan to Congress on how to get out of the Depression and how things could be made better. It's very interesting. We have copies of it if anybody was ever interested. I find it interesting that he was very hard on the banks, and that if you had to get good pay when you worked. If you worked, you should get paid. If you worked a lot, you should get paid overtime, which is interesting to read. It was very refreshing, but he had many different ideas and worked on them. And like I said, he could have stayed in New York. He could have stayed on his island. He could have been just, I'm here and you're there, and that's just too bad. But that's not the case. He worked to make this county better. Kind of interested in it. You come to duck hunt and you end up changing the whole education system in Currituck County. He not only funded it every year, and to this day, the Knapp Mellon group, or actually they're still like a think tank, I do believe, they still give some monies to it. I like to think he would be happy knowing that the school is now early college. I'm sure he'd be kind of disappointed in the conservation efforts because he firmly embraced them, that you had to have it in order to have a good and sound country. And his house, while it is very beautiful, is not over the top. And we'll go inside and take a look, and you can see for yourself. This is the front porch. When he passed away, he was cremated. He had some of his ashes left in New York, but the remainder were brought here. And he was buried in the Dudley Cemetery in Moyock, in the place, as he stated, he loved the most. And of course, it's a very fine monument there. That's Mrs. Knapp and Mrs. Dudley on the front porch. In 1954, Mr. Dudley went over and took Ektachrome slides, God love him. And of course, the color's good. And we have those to this day and are able to have a record here. There are so many things about Mr. Knapp that I could tell you about, but we'll just take a look and know how fortunate we were to have seriously, a great man come here, stay here, and help as he did. Sitting on the porch. She was, Mrs. Knapp, liked actors and actresses and knew a lot of people. And we think that is some friends of hers. She loved the beach. He didn't like the sand, but they were good friends of the Griggses, who owned Hampton Lodge, and they also had the Croatan Inn. So they were quite friendly. They knew the Knapps, the Knights, and they knew everybody up and down. They knew the big boys, but they knew the little ones too. And we also have a letter that I got a few years back, written to Miss Bernie Sunburn Griggs, as he called her all the time. She had asked him on help on how to sell Hampton Lodge. And he had sent her 2 plans written in pencil. We've got that with us today. I urge you to take a look at it. So she had hired this artist. He was German. There is a picture he painted in the in the Barco Library of Mrs. Knapp. You can see he's doing a picture of that sundial. Here's the entrance. As you can see, it's quite colonial in style. It's nice things, don't get me wrong, but we do know where that big brass box lock is. And of course, this is going into the living room. That's an earlier picture of Mrs. Knapp. Yeah. And of course, you can see it's lovely. The interior, very nice oil paintings. Again, we have one of those. Sadly enough, when he passed, she wasn't going to stay. So many things got disposed of. And then, of course, the house sat derelict for years. But we'll take a look. Quite nice. Yeah. I know. I was just looking at all the the detail in all the woodwork. It's quite lovely. It's all in the living room. We think that is a picture of perhaps his mother as a girl. We're not sure. Like I say, there's our sideboard looking through to the dining room. This is the upstairs parlor. This is where, if you had had a heavy night of it, you could have something brought to restore you to this parlor. That is French silk wallpaper, by the way. Yes, indeed. Have some tea or maybe the hair of the dog. I'm not sure. Again, that's a nice shot of that paper. We think this is the up on the third floor, might have been servants' quarters, but again, quite lovely. We think this might have been her room or a guest room. And again, there's the nautical paintings again. Looking over there, her little writing desk. Quite nice. Aha. This is Mr. Knapp's study. And another part of the story is, of course, he was very interested in, because we were just starting with game wardens and federal wardens. And again, if you were going to be a warden of any type, you needed to be trained. And he felt strongly that you needed something to go by. So now we start getting into Institute of Government, which he didn't live long enough to see it completely done. But in Chapel Hill, he went in and taught and wanted that started. But even before that, he had started how to make laws that made sense as far as evidence and duck hunting, all of it. If you were going to be a warden, you needed education. You couldn't just be out there willy-nilly. And again, this is how he approached everything. And here's where it all started. It's a very modest room by any means, although there's some lovely paneling. That map you see to the right of your screen is in his office, and that desk that they took up to Chapel Hill, and it is there, and many of his papers. Again, modest enough, small enough, no grandiose spot, but a lot of thinking went there. Of course, now I believe there is a Remington up there on the mantle in one of these pictures. So not without means at all. Painting is a Remington. So that leather chair, you can just imagine being able to sit there and have a fire and think and be able to move on it. We have a replica of this map over at the Wildlife Center, and a copy of his plan that he got started for More Game Birds of America. And we have some examples down here on the floor, on the stage. Today, both schools Mr. Knapp built are being used. The last teacherage standing, the other two burned, the one at Moyock and the one at Poplar Branch. They used that building as the superintendent's office. It's right there, as Mama used to say, Currituck proper. I think Mr. Knapp would be happy that at least Mackey Island is now a national wildlife refuge that was bought out in the early 60s, and that it's still propagating for ducks. They still plant food plots. We have 2 20-acre impoundments there, and people still go there to fish, and they have limited hunts. There's an example of the teachers. There's the one that's still standing, of course, in Currituck and Knapp School. And of course, now Knapp Early College School. That's, like I say, More Game Birds. And they picked up on all this propagation, and this is where it started. Some people like to think it happened up in Virginia, but I give this lecture enough on the background of More Game Birds of America to tell them they are wrong. It started here in North Carolina. This is one of Mr. Knapp's propagation efforts, one of his impoundments. Again, probably over 5,000 birds a year. There's Mrs. Knapp. This is 54, in fact. He has passed away, and she is down to document, and they took these pictures. This is their small place in Riverkill, New York. She was an avid fly fisherman as well. No doubt that they together, he liked to fish and hunt, and she did too. And it's a small house, but my gosh, look how lovely. There's a Creole up there on the right side of the picture, you can see. And the view is quite beautiful. And of course, a nice lunch set out on the back table with all your china and crystal. It's beautiful though. I'd like to go to lunch there. And that was the creek that was behind their house. And there she is fly fishing. Sadly, when she passed away, from all reports and purposes, she drank too much, and it was a bit of a sad ending. But here is the memorial at Dudley Cemetery, and they used to go every year. The kids did from the high school and do a memorial. There's the stone. It's student government going strong, and of course, 1960. I like to think he'd be happy with all these impoundments and all the birds that are there. There is Ducks Unlimited did come and set up this memorial there. That's the remnant of where the boathouse was. So you can get an image when you're standing there. Unfortunately, most of Oak Point has washed away, but the impoundments are still good. There's a Charles Corral Trail there. You can still go over on open roads and see some wonderful things. For almost 25 years, we did a Grand Wing program over there for National Hunting and Fishing Day. And I like to think he'd be more than pleased about that. We've taken over at one time 414 children with their families, and well, that was a day. But to our credit, hardly believe in 25 years we never had a kid get a fish hook in his hand. Amazing. But we took him out and let him roam. And you could drive back there and of course eat his hot dogs till you're sick and maybe see a carp that big because you haven't seen them before. The best question I ever got asked when I was over there, because I did so enjoy doing this. It was a lot of work, but he was a little fella. And he asked me, Miss Sharon, is this the wilderness? And I said, it sure is, partner. Just going out there, there's no cell service over there. So, I mean, yeah, they thought it was the wilderness. And for some, sadly, people don't know that we have Mackey Island Wildlife Refuge in Currituck County. So we urge to get out and unwind. These are pictures taken in 54. You can see sunsets on Currituck Sound are still glorious and beautiful. And we're lucky that we've got them to see. And boats at dusk. And boats at dusk. Am I getting to that? Okay. And this, I took right outside my building, Currituck at dusk with duck hunting boats, still just as glorious, changed, but still beautiful. And one more side story. Before the war, they had taken out the locks at Great Bridge. They had been out for almost 10 years. And Mr. Knapp, as always, was concerned about the salinity and what was happening to his beloved Currituck Sound and asked the government to put the locks back. But the war effort was on, and they told him they could not afford it. So he told them, well, I'll loan you the money. Well, the next excuse was, well, we can't spare the steel. Well, there happened to be a hunt lodge right down from Mr. Knapp's owned by, called Corey's Lodge. This was John Corey, who was the president of U.S. Steel. So needless to say, he found the steel, Knapp paid for it, and they put the locks back in to help preserve the salinity of Currituck Sound. I don't know too many people that would come, move in, rebuild your locks, educate your children. We were so lucky to have him. I hope you enjoyed hearing about him. Come see us over at the Wildlife Center sometime because, like Sissy will tell me, it's not so how long are you going to talk or when we can get her to stop. So thank you for coming today, and I'd be pleased to take any questions if you have.